Hi, I'm Rich Breckner with Inside HPC, and I'm here with Brent Gorda. He's the CEO of Whamcloud.
Hi, Rich.
How you doing today?
I'm doing great. A little jet lagged, but
little jet lag. Yeah,
it's cool to be in Lugano.
Yeah, we're in beautiful Lugano, Switzerland. A gorgeous place on a lake in the foothills of the Alps. But we're here to kind of set the stage for LUG, the Lustre User Group 2012, coming up in Austin. So, Brent, first question I had is is Lustre starting to mature? I mean, is it starting to get ready for the enterprise?
Absolutely. We see it already being used in enterprise, and I hesitate to say it, but it's not just the brave and the bold doing that. It's much more mainstream than we had anticipated. One of the problems with this knowledge, it just didn't exist in the past. Lustre had been free to download, and there was no registration page. So you could go download it, and then nobody ever knew who you were or what you were doing with it. We're starting to have a voluntary registration when you download it from our site. That's attracting users from all over the planet and in industries that would just shake your head. It really is pleasantly surprising and uplifting to see where it's being used. For example, there are at least 2 banks in Europe using Lustre at this moment. One of them uses it in a transactional environment where it is critical infrastructure to their banking, to where their customers, if the file system's not available, their customers are offline and cannot transact business. So that is key technology, and it's right in your face. We're seeing reports back from people that we talk with a lot, such as Oak Ridge. Galen Shipman just put out a comment that said that one of their file systems, 8 out of 10 of their file systems were up 100% of the time over an 8-month period, and the other 2 were up 99-point-something% of the time. That's pretty solid, and that's in an environment where they're beating on the file system pretty hard, right? They are a top 10, multiple machines top 10 beating on that file system. So I think the old days where Lustre was perceived as being flaky, the reality is it's behind us. Now, whether people's mindsets catch up with that in real time or not remains to be seen.
So how important is stability as you guys move forward with the releases now? Going on at 2.2, is that the
2.2 is the next release.
Yeah.
Stability is paramount. If you think about having problems in your system, if you have a problem with your operating system, you reboot a node, you come back up, you keep going. If your file system craps the bed, when it comes back up, it's got to eat its dog food and make sense of that data, right? If you can't do that, that's called data loss, and people don't like data losses. So failure in a file system is a much bigger deal than failure in an OS. You can't just rerun the job because you've already scratched on the data.
So Brent, I heard that there's metadata issues with Lustre. Can you characterize the problem and what you guys are doing about it?
So there can be slowness issues with the metadata server because it can be overwhelmed. It's a single box. And historically, you can think of it as being single-threaded because when the metadata server was written, there was one CPU in a box, right? Think back before the multi-core stuff. So one angle of attack that we've spent a lot of effort on and are checking the code in is to make the metadata server SMP parallel within a box so that it can take advantage of those multi-cores. The real win here, though, is to be able to have multiple boxes and any number of multiple boxes. And we're taking the first half step with that with something we called DNE, Distributed Namespace. And what that does is it allows you to take a single metadata server and dedicate it to one or more directories. So you've bifurcated the namespace, so you don't have multiple metadata servers serving up the same directory, you have them serving up separate directories. Often what happens at the big labs is a new user gets on, and he gets on a big Cray or a big IBM, and he sends the file system into tailspin. Right? It's literally a denial of service attack on the metadata server. There's one of them, one guy's doing something silly, and he's doing it times 100,000 or something crazy. So Eric likes to say the Lustre file system was architected to withstand a denial of service, work its way through it, and produce the data. This is what goes on. So with this code that we're going to check in, this D&E code, what you can do is you can take Bob, the guy who's messing up the file system, and you can move his directory onto a metadata server and say, okay, Bob, go learn how to use the file system, because you're not going to affect the other users. Or perhaps you have a better example is Bert, who's a real user at Livermore. Hi, Bert.
Mm-hmm.
And his application is a big, hairy, does everything nice, but is a big, consumes all of Blue Gene type application. So you can give him his own metadata server so that others don't interrupt him or so that he doesn't interrupt others. It's an efficiency type thing. So this is the first step towards the real goal of having multiple metadata servers in a single directory and thus multiple metadata servers across all of your metadata. That will scale up the metadata services quite large.
So, you know, Lustre made its hay with doing hero kind of numbers. And this is the year we're going to see at least one or two 10 petaflop, 20 petaflop systems come online. Where does Lustre play a role there?
So Lustre is the only technology that can work in those environments. Livermore, for example, has a big machine, an IBM Blue Gene Q system that I actually worked on when I was at Livermore. 20 petaflops coming online. They're shipping racks in right now. They are standing up a file system that they purchased the hardware from NetApp. It's 55 petabytes formatted, so one big POSIX file system. They've got a contractual goal for half a terabyte and a stretch goal for a terabyte a second into that file system.
Wow.
So to put that in layman's terms, Lake Tahoe is 36 trillion gallons of water. 36 terabytes. You could drain Lake Tahoe in 36 seconds with the fire hose that is Lustre. It'd be fun to watch.
And, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, as we move to exascale, what kind of numbers are they speccing out? What kind of bandwidth are they going to need for a system of that size?
Depending who you talk to, it's anywhere between 60 terabytes a second and over 200, like 240, 250 terabytes a second.
So, you know, behind that, I'm thinking thousands and thousands of disk drives.
You're already in the 10,000 range, so think much bigger. And disk drives are not getting any faster, right? They still have the rotational latency delays, which is where an SSD can help, but the bandwidths are not increasing. The size, the capacity is increasing along a nice line, but the bandwidth to the device is not increasing. Where that bites you is if you have a corrupt disk, a rebuild can take hours upon hours. If you've ever heard anybody talk about parity declustering, that's talking about spreading the parity across multiple disks so you can do a parallel rebuild to the device that's died.
Right.
That's going to be necessary because in the 8 to 12 hours it takes to rebuild a disk, you're going to have another fault. And so now you have to have more than two in your RAID set.
So we were going to talk about what's in store coming up here for the Lustre. So, you know, we're anticipating a new release sometime around LUG. Is that in the plan still?
2.2 release is in its testing stages right now. Things are looking good. We're hoping to hit LUG for a release on that.
Okay. And what's coming after that?
Well, so we've committed, at least internally and a little bit publicly to, and I guess I'm committing right now publicly, to 6-month feature releases. If you remember the roadmap you've seen, the top line is a maintenance release, the bottom line is a feature release. So we're on a cadence to do 6-month feature releases and every 3 months have a maintenance release come out. So that's what we've promised to ourselves and are promising to the community.
And then as far as, you know, that's the normal roadmap, but you guys are adding something very special to Lustre in the form of Chroma, are you not? What's coming with that? Is that coming to beta?
Chroma is the most exciting thing to hit Lustre in a long while. Everybody believes or perceives Lustre to be difficult to work with. What Chroma does is it brings intelligent management, monitoring, and control to your file system. So partners of ours can pre-install Chroma on their hardware and create a Lustre appliance that you roll in, turn on, and manage through an intuitive graphical user interface. Everything from provisioning to automated failover to monitoring and alert setting. that sort of thing. This tool has been a year in the making, and it's been done by half a dozen of the smartest technical guys I know of, and gals. These are the people who wrote Lustre. They know what's going inside Lustre. They know where it falls over. They know what sorts of manual steps are necessary to poke it in the right place to start it back up again. So imagine a tool that can sense that something's gone online and knows how to automatically recover that and get you back up again, and then send an email to your sysadmin who's sitting with his heels up and say, I just fixed your file system for you.
Now, you said today in your presentation about Whamcloud and your plans that Chroma was of paramount importance. And I thought Chroma was just a GUI. Is it more than that?
I mean, it's much more than that.
Well, then it can't be. Okay, so that was my mistake.
A GUI is a window that drives a command line. Makes it easy to press a button instead of typing in a command. Chroma is the opposite end of the spectrum now. Chroma doesn't drive a command line. Chroma works at the interface level. And Chroma isn't the actual GUI part. It's the engine that drives Lustre. It presents an interface to a GUI. It presents an interface to a web service. It presents an interface to a command line. So depending on where the technical person, at what level the technical person wants to work, they can work at any of those three levels, which means it can be embedded into another management tool, it can be scripted, or it can be driven from the single pane of glass that we'll provide.
Mm-hmm. So Lustre is open source. Is Chroma an open source component of Lustre?
No, Chroma is held as proprietary. Whamcloud is a company that's trying to eke out a living, and so this is one of our attempts to try and do that by growing up into a more mature company with IP.
And then, as we move to exascale, how important will a tool like Chroma be versus what they're doing today with bash scripts and a lot of command line stuff?
The number of exascale machines that are going to be out in the next 10 years could probably be counted on one finger, definitely on one hand. And the folks who are going to be building those systems will be the command line folks. Okay. So they may use Chroma by the command line, but they may use Lustre directly. If you take a look at the big sites today, the Oak Ridges, the Livermores, they are happy using the command line. Where Chroma adds significant value is to enhance the Lustre ecosystem and bring Lustre down market to people who don't want to dedicate someone to running a file system. They want their Linux admin guy to be able to run this monster file system that before Chroma you couldn't think about touching. That's where the value is going to be. And by bringing this to our partners and to the community, we increase the size of the Lustre market, which should make everybody happy. Everybody's shipping more hardware, there's more funds on the table. It grows the community for everybody.
Well, speaking of that, now we're heading into the Lustre User Group 2012. What do you think the community should focus on accomplishing at this one? It was really clear what they needed to do last year was come together, right?
Yeah,
what about this year?
I think this year's about moving forward and thinking about an ecosystem. Thinking about opening our arms and embracing more than just HPC, right? We've already got the European open file system and the American open file system groups working tightly together, attending each other's meetings. That's working well. The technical people need to get their heads together and say, hey, this technology is really interesting for the folks who like buzzwords like big data, right? When I go to a big data event and I say, oh yeah, we're doing a terabyte a second, jaws drop. People don't think you can move data at those rates, and they especially don't think you can move data at those rates to a POSIX file system, which is the current goal. And so I think there should be a big rise in interest from big data and a huge amount of opportunity for the existing Lustre talent to go mine those fields and do things with it. Whamcloud wants to be the enabler of that ecosystem. We want to cooperate with people and let them go out and do all this. That's why we are really focused on being the maintainers of the tree. Of course, OpenSFS has given us a contract to help offset that cost because it's a pretty high cost. So they're helping us with that. But we're keeping the tree completely open and completely transparent. The other thing I mentioned in my talk is that all of our development is done in the open. When I go to check on a project, when I go to check on tests, passing, failing, I go to the same URL that anybody can go look at, real-time data available transparently. I like that. Our engineers like that. No hide the ball.
Right.
We're real.
So speaking of being out front, it looked like you guys have, at Whamcloud, have very serious involvement with the lug agenda. I saw your name all over. How many sessions do you guys have?
We have 8, plus I think maybe a vendor session since we're a sponsor. It's down a little bit from last year, but we're happy to see others there giving talks about what they're doing. The folks at IU, for example, are doing a WAN talk, which is very, very cool. Mm-hmm. You know, you think about the cloud and AWS and syncing your data from one geography to another in case there's a crash, right? The technology that IU is enabling here allows Lustre to be that underpinning for that big data movement. And cloud and HPC are not that far apart.